She worked 4 jobs to save her husband from ruin. But one night, standing outside their bedroom door, she heard him laugh and call her his free maid. That was the moment Imani realized. She wasn't a wife. She was his servant. It was 11:47 p.m. when Imani Reed's key turned in the lock. The sound was soft, almost swallowed by the stillness of the small house she'd once called her sanctuary. Her arms ached from scrubbing office floors, her back screamed from bending over restaurant tables, and her hands were raw from disinfectant. Every muscle in her body begged her to collapse right there on the hallway rug, to sleep for a year and never wake up. But she couldn't. Not yet. She still had to shower. Still had to wash the uniform that smelled like bleach and fried oil. Still had to prepare for her hospital shift that started in less than 7 hours. Imani dropped her purse onto the narrow entry table, the strap slipping off her shoulder and landing with a dull thud. The sound echoed through the house like a sigh, heavy, defeated, final. Her reflection in the hallway mirror startled her. The woman staring back looked nothing like the bright, laughing girl Malik Ward had married 7 years ago. That woman had dreams. She'd wanted to become a physical therapist, open her own practice someday. She'd believed in love stories, in partnership, in forever. The woman in the mirror tonight looked hollow. Eyes red from fatigue. Cheeks drawn. Hair pulled into a messy bun that barely hid the gray strands peeking through. She looked like someone who'd been living in survival mode for too long. Just 2 more years, Malik had said. Once we clear the debt, everything will get better. Baby. That was 3 years ago. Imani pressed her palm against her forehead and closed her eyes. Debt. That cursed word had become the center of her universe. Malik's gambling mistake, he'd called it. He'd been so sorry, tears streaming down his face the night he confessed. He had promised to change. Promised it was the last time. Promised that if she helped him, they'd start fresh, and she believed him. Because love made you believe the best in people, didn't it? So she had picked up one extra job, then another, until her life was nothing but shifts, schedules, and exhaustion. 4 jobs, no sleep, no weekends, no friends. Just Malik's bills and Malik's promises. Imani reached down, untying her shoes. Her socks were damp, her feet throbbing. She winced as she peeled them off. The skin around her heels had split open in small cracks. I can't keep doing this, she whispered into the empty air. But then she remembered Malik's face that morning, his soft smile, his casual, "Love you, babe. Be safe." That smile had once melted her heart. Now it made her stomach twist. She wanted to believe he appreciated her. She wanted to believe the long nights, the back-breaking work, the loneliness were for something. But lately, something felt off. Malik had stopped pretending to job hunt. He slept till noon, scrolled his phone endlessly, and claimed he was waiting on the right business opportunity. He always had excuses. Still, Imani forced herself to believe. Because believing was easier than facing the possibility that she'd been played. She hung her jacket on the rack and tiptoed down the hall. The lights were dim except for a faint glow coming from under the bedroom door. Malik never waited up for her. So why was he awake now? Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe he was watching TV again? Maybe. Then she heard it. A sound that made her freeze mid-step. Laughter. Not just Malik's voice, but other male voices, rough and careless, drifting through the crack in the door. She frowned. He was talking to someone, on speaker by the sound of it. His tone was light, relaxed, almost giddy. She hadn't heard that tone in years. It felt like eavesdropping on a stranger wearing her husband's voice. Imani leaned closer. "Man," Malik said, his tone full of smug amusement. "I got it made, bro. My wife, she's my personal maid. Works all day, pays all the bills, never asks questions." The words hit like a fist to her chest. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd imagined it. Maybe he was joking. Maybe this was one of those stupid locker room jokes men made to sound impressive. But then another voice, one of his friends, laughed. "You serious? She's still working all them jobs?" "Oh yeah," Malik said proudly. "Hospital, restaurant, call center, janitor. 4 in total. Girl's got more hustle than anyone I know." The laughter grew louder. "And what you doing while she out grinding?" Another man teased. Malik chuckled. "Man, I handle the important stuff, keeping the couch warm. Somebody's got to supervise, right?" More laughter. Imani's hand flew to her mouth. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure they'd hear it. Then came the final blow. "She thinks we're getting out of debt together," Malik continued. "But nah, I ain't stressin'. She's out there breaking her back while I'm sitting here with my drink, my game, my peace. Told y'all, I got a free maid who thinks she's in love. The laughter that followed was cruel. Imani staggered backward, her vision blurring. Her purse slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor. No one inside noticed. They were too busy laughing. She turned, leaning against the wall for balance. The hallway felt like it was closing in on her. For 3 years, she had been killing herself to keep them afloat, skipping meals, losing sleep, working holidays, while he mocked her for it. The man she had trusted. The man she had believed. A sound escaped her throat, half gasp, half sob, but she swallowed it down. She couldn't let him hear. Not yet. Imani backed into the kitchen, her legs trembling. The air smelled like stale takeout and cheap whiskey. On the counter sat a glass, his glass, half full of liquor she couldn't afford. Everywhere she looked, there were reminders of her sacrifices. The groceries she bought, the bills she paid, the home she maintained, all built on her sweat. And his lies. She sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands. The exhaustion that had once been physical now turned into something deeper, emotional, bone-deep fatigue. The kind that came when the truth finally burned away every last illusion. For years she had convinced herself she was doing the right thing. That real love meant loyalty, sacrifice, forgiveness. But what about self-respect? What about dignity? Imani looked up at the refrigerator door. There was a photo taped there, a picture from their wedding day. She was smiling, radiant and white. Malik was kissing her forehead. She couldn't recognize the woman in that photo anymore. That woman believed she was marrying a partner. The woman sitting here now realized she had married a parasite. Her eyes hardened. For the first time in years, the exhaustion in her body began to fade, replaced by something sharp and steady. Not rage, not even heartbreak clarity. It was the sound of a door creaking open behind her that made her jolt. Malik's voice floated down the hallway again, laughing at some new joke. She didn't listen this time. She didn't need to, because now she knew exactly who he was, and she knew this life, the one she'd been breaking herself for, was about to end. The sound of Malik's voice still echoed inside Imani's skull as she stood frozen in the hallway. Each laugh that slipped through the bedroom door felt like the scrape of glass against her skin. She wanted to burst in, to scream, to ask why, but something deep in her spine told her not to. Not yet. She needed to hear everything. She crept closer, pressing her palm against the cool paint of the wall. Through the thin crack she saw the faint glow of the lamp. Malik slouched against the headboard with his phone propped on speaker. He looked so relaxed, bare feet crossed, a tumbler of amber whiskey in his hand. A lazy grin spread across his face. "Bro, you wild," one of the men on the call said, laughter shaking the speaker. "You mean to tell me she's out there mopping floors while you sittin' home chillin'?" Malik took a slow sip. "Ain't that what marriage is?" She said, "For better or worse, I'm just holding her to it." The group erupted again. Imani's chest constricted. She pressed a hand over her mouth, afraid the sob building inside might betray her. For 3 years she had defended this man to everyone. Her mother, her co-workers, even her own reflection. When people whispered that Malik was lazy, she called them judgmental. When her mother hinted that something wasn't right, she'd said, "He's just under pressure." She had carried his reputation like a shield, and all the while he had been laughing behind her back. Then she heard another voice on the call, softer, teasing. "What about that Lil thing you've been seeing? You still running with her?" Imani's blood turned cold. Malik chuckled. "You mean Tasha?" "Oh yeah, she's around. She don't know about the money situation, though. Thinks I'm doing good. I take her to them fancy places Imani pays for." "Girl ain't got a clue." Another round of laughter burst through the speaker. The words blurred after that. Imani's ears rang so loudly she could barely stand. She staggered back, gripping the wall for balance. Her vision swam, the hallway spinning like a carousel. He had another woman. He was spending her money on her. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She turned, walked back down the hallway, every step feeling heavier than the last. When she reached the kitchen, she collapsed against the counter, breathless. The granite felt icy beneath her fingertips. She stared at it for a long moment, remembering how carefully she had picked it out 5 years ago when they bought the house. She had been so proud, running her hands over the silver-flecked stone, imagining all the dinners they would share, all the laughter they would have in this home. Now she realized she had built her own prison, Polished it, furnished it, paid for every inch of it, and handed Malik the key. Her hands trembled. The laughter still floated faintly from the bedroom. She could picture him there, still drinking, still bragging. A single tear rolled down her cheek and dropped onto the counter. Then another. Then the flood. She covered her face and sobbed silently, shoulders shaking. The kind of crying that comes when the last thread snaps, not out of weakness, but because the truth finally has nowhere else to go. When the tears subsided, what remained wasn't despair. It was clarity. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. The clock on the wall read 12:09 a.m. In 6 hours, she'd have to be at the hospital. She could drag herself to bed, sleep 4 hours, wake up and pretend nothing happened. Pretend she hadn't just heard her husband call her a maid. Pretend the woman who had built this life wasn't being mocked for it. Or she could do something she hadn't done in years. Think about herself. She opened her phone. Her hands were still shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. There it was, Brenda Lewis, the coworker who always told her, "Girl, one day you're gonna drop dead from exhaustion and that man of yours still gonna be napping." Imani had always laughed it off. Now those words cut different. Imani typed out a message, "Can we talk tomorrow?" Something happened. I need advice. She hovered for a second, then hit send. The sound of Malik's voice drifted again, now lower, almost smug. "She thinks we're a team. Poor thing's too tired to check the bank statements, that was it. The last nail." Imani straightened, her reflection in the dark window almost unfamiliar. Puffy eyes, trembling lips, but a spark she hadn't seen in years. Something had ignited. She whispered to her reflection, "No more." And for the first time in 3 years, she actually meant it. The morning sun crept through the blinds, painting thin golden stripes across the kitchen floor. Imani hadn't slept. She sat at the table still wearing her cleaning uniform, staring at the same coffee mug she'd been holding for an hour. The steam had long vanished, leaving the bitter smell of burnt beans in the air. Every few minutes her mind replayed Malik's laughter. That easy, careless sound. It looped like a cruel song she couldn't turn off. When her alarm buzzed at 4:45 a.m., she almost laughed. Her body felt like lead, her brain like wet sand, but she moved anyway. Years of habit made her mechanical. She showered, dressed in her scrubs, tied her hair back, and drove to the hospital as the city yawned awake. The drive was a blur of gray light and empty streets. She barely remembered the turns. At a red light, she caught herself gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles whitened. "Don't cry," she muttered. "Not here. Not now." She repeated it like a mantra until she pulled into the employee lot. Inside the hospital, fluorescent lights hummed above her head. The smell of disinfectant wrapped around her like a reminder of all the nights she'd sacrificed here. The other employees greeted her with tired smiles. "Morning, Imani. You okay?" She lied the way overworked people learn to lie. "Just tired." At her desk sat Brenda, mid-50s, sharp eyes, soft heart. She took one look at Imani and frowned. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Imani's throat tightened. "I'm fine." Brenda slid a cup of coffee toward her. "Then drink, and tell me what's really wrong." Imani hesitated. For months she'd hidden everything. Malik's debts, his laziness, her exhaustion. But the words spilled out now like a dam breaking. She told Brenda about the 4 jobs, the endless bills, the late nights. And finally she told her about what she heard last night. The laughter, the bragging, the word made. Brenda's jaw tightened. "That man's no husband, baby. That's a parasite. I don't even know who he is anymore," Imani whispered. "Sure you do," Brenda said. "You just didn't want to see it." She leaned forward, voice softening. "Listen to me. You can't fix him, but you can fix your life. My divorce lawyer, Patricia Morgan, helped me when my ex pulled the same nonsense. You want her number?" Imani blinked. The word divorce felt foreign, heavy, but something in her chest loosened at the thought. "Yes," she said quietly. "Please." Brenda scribbled a name and number on a sticky note. "Call her today. Tell her Brenda sent you. And Imani, don't you dare feel guilty. Guilt's what keeps women like us trapped." Imani folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket like a secret weapon. For the rest of her shift, she worked in silence. Her mind wasn't on the computer screen or the patients, it was in that house behind that door, hearing Malik's voice again and again. By the time the clock struck 2, she had made her decision. She wouldn't confront him yet. Not until she was ready. But she would start building her escape. The sun was high when she walked out of the hospital, the brightness almost offensive after such a dark night. She squinted, unlocking her old sedan, the heat pressing against her skin. For a moment she considered going home, but the thought of hearing Malik's voice made her stomach turn. Instead, she drove straight to a small cafe down the block. She ordered an iced tea, sat in the corner booth, and dialed the number on the sticky note. Patricia Morgan's office. A woman answered. "Hi," Imani said, her voice trembling slightly. "My name's Imani Reed. Brenda Lewis gave me your number. I need help." Within minutes, she had an appointment for the next morning. When she hung up, she felt the smallest flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: control. That night, Imani pulled into her driveway at 10:30. Malik's car was there. Lights glowed inside. She sat in her own car for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel. The house that had once felt like safety now looked like a trap. When she finally walked in, Malik was sprawled on the couch, TV blaring, half a pizza on the coffee table. He glanced up and grinned. "Hey, baby." "Long day?" Imani's pulse thundered, but her face stayed neutral. "The usual." "Good, I was thinking maybe we could go out this weekend. You know, date night." She forced a small smile. "That sounds nice." Inside, her stomach twisted. He leaned over and kissed her cheek. "Love you, babe." The words slid off her like oil on water. She nodded, walked to the bathroom, and closed the door behind her. Inside, she turned on the faucet full blast, drowning out her shaky breathing. In the mirror, the woman staring back wasn't the same one from last night. Her eyes were still tired, but there was steel there now. Purpose. She whispered to her reflection, "Tomorrow, it begins." And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The alarm buzzed at 4 a.m., slicing through the quiet. Imani's eyes snapped open to darkness. For a second, she forgot where she was. Then the ache in her back reminded her. She had fallen asleep sitting up in the guest room chair, still dressed in scrubs, phone in her lap. Her neck throbbed, her mouth was dry, but her mind was clear. The memory of Malik's laughter from 2 nights before no longer made her cry. It hardened her. Each word he had said had stripped another layer of illusion, until nothing remained except the truth. The man she loved saw her as a paycheck with legs. She rose and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The tile was icy under her feet. She filled a glass with water and stared out the window. Dawn had not yet broken. Only the faintest blue hint of morning hovered above the rooftops. Somewhere a delivery truck rumbled. The world kept moving, indifferent to her private collapse. Imani took a slow sip and whispered to herself, "This house isn't mine anymore." It wasn't just the mortgage or the furniture. It was the air, the walls, the weight of humiliation that clung to everything. She could almost hear the ghosts of her own laughter echoing off the walls, back when she believed Malik's bad luck was temporary, when she thought they were a team. She turned and looked at the table piled with bills. Every envelope had her handwriting on it. Every payment had come from her work. Malik's contribution was excuses. A quiet rage simmered, not the fiery, reckless kind. The cold, calculating kind that meant change was already in motion. When Malik finally stumbled into the kitchen around noon, yawning, she was dressed for her call center shift. He kissed her cheek and smiled, completely unaware that his reign was ending. "Hey babe, you make any coffee?" "Not today," she said evenly. "You can make some if you want." He blinked, surprised by the flatness in her tone. Sure." He laughed awkwardly. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She grabbed her keys and walked out the door before he could say another word. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, but not from fear, from adrenaline. She could feel it, the beginning of the end. That evening after work, she parked outside a small law office tucked between a flower shop and a dentist's clinic. A simple brass plaque read Patricia Morgan and Associates. Inside, the reception smelled of lemon polish and paper. Patricia herself greeted her. Mid-40s, short silver curls, steady eyes that missed nothing. "I'm glad you came," Patricia said as they sat in a modest office lined with case files. "Brenda told me you're carrying the weight of the world." Imani gave a shaky laugh. "Feels that way." "Tell me everything," Patricia said. No judgment, no interruptions, and Imani did. She told her about the debts, the endless jobs, the overheard conversation, the other woman, the humiliation. Words poured out faster than she could stop them. When she finished, her throat burned. Patricia folded her hands. First, none of this is your fault. Second, we can fix this. Fix this, Imani whispered. The phrase sounded like hope. If you never signed for his loans or credit cards, they're his responsibility, not yours. We'll separate your finances, gather evidence, and plan your exit quietly. Imani blinked. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple, Patricia said, smiling gently. But it will be worth it. She slid a checklist across the desk. Open a new bank account in your name only. Redirect your paychecks immediately. Collect every document that proves his spending. Do not confront him until we're ready. Imani stared at the paper. It was just ink and bullet points, but to her it looked like freedom mapped out in 4 steps. She left the office lighter than she'd entered. The sky outside was turning violet, city lights flickering to life. For the first time in years, she didn't dread going home. Because now she wasn't walking into his house. She was walking into enemy territory. That night, she slipped quietly into the guest room and hid the new paperwork beneath an old stack of hospital forms. Malik snored softly down the hall. She sat on the edge of the bed, whispering, "You think I'm your maid? Then you've underestimated me." And with that thought, Imani Reed began the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming her life. Saturday afternoon arrived heavy with heat. Malik had gone to the gym, his latest excuse to spend hours away doing nothing productive. The house was quiet. Perfect. Imani opened the door to his office, the room she'd avoided for years. The stench of stale beer and cologne hit her immediately. The blinds were half closed, the desk buried under a mess of papers, fast food wrappers, and empty bottles. She paused at the threshold, pulse racing. This was sacred ground in Malik's mind. He had always said, "Don't touch my work stuff, babe." Work stuff. She almost laughed out loud. She pulled on latex gloves from her cleaning kit, a habit from her night job, and began sifting through the chaos. Receipts, unopened mail, sticky notes scribbled with nonsense. She opened drawers methodically. The first held nothing but pens and tangled chargers. The second, a stack of unpaid bills dating back 2 years. The third, bingo. Under a layer of old magazines lay a bundle of credit card statements held together with a rubber band. She flipped through them, her stomach tightening with each page. Jewelry stores, hotels, luxury dinners. None of these places she'd ever been. One charge for a seaside resort, $780. Another for a diamond bracelet, $430. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to photograph every statement with her phone. Click, click, click. Each photo was another piece of proof. Another nail in Malik's coffin. She found an envelope labeled business account. Inside were bank statements showing transfers from their joint account, her paychecks to his personal one. The totals made her dizzy. Tens of thousands siphoned over 3 years. Her exhaustion evaporated, replaced by something electric. For once, she wasn't powerless. She was documenting, building her case, taking back her narrative. A notification buzzed on her phone. New email, Patricia Morgan. Remember, stay calm. He can't suspect. Collect quietly. You're doing great, Imani smiled. You have no idea, she thought. She kept searching, driven by equal parts fury and curiosity. Inside an old shoebox, she discovered folded notes, printed emails, and then photos. Malik with a young woman, Tasha, no doubt, at restaurants, the beach, the same resort from the bill. The sight should have broken her, but instead it solidified something inside. Certainty. She had doubted her instincts for too long. She photographed everything, sealed the box again, and wiped the surfaces clean. When she stepped back into the hallway, her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She half expected Malik to burst through the front door to catch her mid-escape, but the house stayed silent. In the kitchen, she placed her phone on the counter, scrolled through the gallery, and whispered, "You bragged about a maid. Now watch what the maid can do." She transferred the photos to a hidden cloud folder, renamed innocuously as Meal Prep Ideas. Then she opened her banking app and completed step 1 of Patricia's list. New account created. Paycheck redirection submitted. Watching the confirmation screen felt like cutting the first link of a chain. That night, when Malik returned, dripping sweat and ego, he asked her to make him dinner. "I'm too tired," she said simply, not looking up from her phone. He frowned. "Too tired? You always cook?" "Not tonight." He muttered something under his breath but fixed his own sandwich. The silence between them stretched like a drawn bowstring. Imani felt strangely calm. She had entered a new phase, observation. Every word, every move, she catalogued it all. Later, while he snored on the couch, she sat by the window and texted Brenda a single line. "It's starting," and it was. The first cracks had appeared in the life Malik thought he controlled. And Imani Reed, once overworked, overforgiving, and overused, was finally learning what power felt like. Sunday night settled over the neighborhood like a heavy blanket, muffling everything except the ticking clock in the hallway. Imani sat alone in the dim kitchen, her phone screen glowing in front of her. On it were all the photographs she'd taken, the credit card statements, the hotel bills, the jewelry receipts, the pictures of Malik and that girl. Each image felt like a wound, but also a weapon. The house was quiet except for Malik's faint snore from the living room. He had fallen asleep watching a game, half a beer still sweating on the coffee table. The TV light flashed across his face, highlighting the deep crease between his brows. Even in sleep, he looked entitled. Imani's thumb hovered over her banking app. The joint account balance blinked. 8 and 12.46, her latest paycheck had hit yesterday. She scrolled down. 2 hours later, a transfer of $600 to Malik's business account. Her jaw tightened. That was the moment. The exact second she crossed from victim to strategist. She turned off the screen and whispered, "No more." The words echoed in the empty room. They sounded strange, like someone else had said them, someone stronger. She opened her laptop. A blank document appeared. She typed 3 words at the top. Imani Reed plan. The typing steadied her trembling hands. Separate accounts. Done collect evidence. Done find lawyer. Done next. Move quietly. Save. Leave. The plan was small, but it was hers. At 12:15 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. Short-staffed tomorrow. Any chance you can cover the early shift? She stared at it. For years, she'd have said yes without hesitation. But now she typed back, "No, I'm unavailable." It was a tiny act of rebellion, yet it sent a thrill through her chest. She would never again break herself to fund Malik's lies. From the living room came a groan and a rustle. Malik turned over, mumbling something incoherent, then went still again. Imani rose quietly, picked up her purse, and tiptoed down the hall to the guest bathroom. She locked the door behind her. Sitting on the edge of the tub, she opened her notes again. Step 4 would take courage. She had to decide when to leave. Her reflection in the mirror looked different tonight. Not just tired, alert, determined. The fear that once filled her stomach had burned away, replaced by a cold fire that felt almost like calm. Outside, a car engine started somewhere down the street. Inside, Malik snored on, oblivious to the revolution brewing under his own roof. Imani whispered to her reflection, "He'll never see it coming." Morning arrived gray and damp. Malik was already awake, rummaging through drawers. "You seen my card?" he asked, irritation dripping from his tone. "Bank says it got declined last night." Imani poured herself coffee. Maybe they froze it for suspicious spending. He frowned. Suspicious? Like what? Jewelry, hotels, restaurants. She didn't look at him. He froze, studying her. "You checking up on me now?" She met his eyes for the first time. "No, just wondering where our money goes," he laughed, forced. "Babe, you worry too much. I got it under control." She nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch until he looked away. Then she picked up her cup and walked out. Her heart hammered, but her voice had been steady. That was enough. By the time she reached her car, her phone buzzed again. An email from Patricia. "Good morning, Imani. I filed the initial financial separation documents. Keep collecting proof. Next step is emotional safety. Find allies you can trust." Allies. She had one in mind already. Brenda Lewis lived in a modest duplex 5 minutes from the hospital. Her porch overflowed with potted plants, ferns, daisies, a stubborn cactus that thrived against all odds. Imani stood there at noon, clutching a paper bag of muffins as a peace offering. Brenda opened the door wearing an oversized t-shirt that read, "Still fabulous. Still fed up. Girl, you look like you ain't slept in a week," she said, pulling Imani into a hug. "Come on in." The smell of coffee and vanilla candles wrapped around Imani like warmth. She sank into the couch while Brenda poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "Tell me everything," Brenda said. Imani did. From the phone call she overheard to Patricia's checklist. She showed Brenda the photos, the receipts, the transfers. When she finished, Brenda sat back, shaking her head slowly. "That man don't even qualify as lazy," she said finally. "He's parasitic." Imani gave a weak laugh. "I just feel stupid. How did I not see it?" "You were busy believing in love," Brenda said gently. "That's not stupidity, that's hope. But hope can blind you," the words hit home. Imani nodded, staring into her mug. "Patricia says I should save enough to leave quietly. But I can't tell my mom yet. She'll panic." "Then you tell me," Brenda said. "Whatever you need. Rides, boxes, a couch to crash on, you got it." Imani's throat tightened. "Thank you," Brenda smiled. "Don't thank me yet. You're gonna need strength for this next part. He's gonna sense something's up. I'll keep acting normal." "Good, just don't let guilt make you hesitate." Imani hesitated. "What if he tries to stop me?" Brenda's expression hardened. "Then you call me and I'll be there before he finishes his sentence." They both laughed. The first real laughter Imani had felt in months. It felt like oxygen. That evening, as she drove home, rain tapped softly on the windshield. The city lights smeared into long streaks of gold and red. Imani rolled the window halfway down, letting cool air hit her face. For the first time, she didn't dread going back. She wasn't returning as Malik's wife. She was returning as the woman planning his exit. Inside the house, Malik sat at the table with his laptop open. "Hey babe," he said casually. "I was thinking we should do a weekend trip soon." "You've been working too hard." Imani set down her purse. "A trip? With what money?" He chuckled. "Relax, I'll handle it," she smiled faintly. "I'm sure you will." He didn't notice the edge in her voice. He never did. After dinner, she excused herself to the guest room and opened her laptop. She made a spreadsheet just like Patricia advised. Every debt, every transaction, every piece of proof. She added a new column, emotion logged. Next to each item, she wrote how it made her feel. Betrayed, angry, disgusted, free. When she finished, she backed up the file on 3 drives. Then she sat on the bed and listened to the rain against the window. The world outside sounded clean. The next morning, Malik left early claiming he had an interview. Imani waited 10 minutes, then walked into his office again. This time she didn't rummage. She cleaned. She sorted documents, photographed new receipts, wiped surfaces spotless. She discovered a small notebook hidden under the printer tray. On the first page, in Malik's handwriting, "Pay Tasha back $500, her stomach turned." Even now, he was borrowing from his mistress. She photographed the note and closed the book carefully. When she stepped out, the air felt lighter, as if the house itself approved of her rebellion. That night, she texted Patricia the new evidence. Within minutes came the reply, "Excellent work. You're doing everything right. We'll file preliminary divorce paperwork soon. Keep your composure," Imani smiled to herself. For once, she felt competent, not crushed. She brushed her hair in the mirror, studying her reflection. There were still dark circles, but her eyes looked alive. The following week blurred into a rhythm. Work, evidence, quiet endurance. Brenda checked in every night. Patricia sent updates. Imani stashed away money, bit by bit, dollar by dollar. She no longer dreamed of Malik's laughter. She dreamed of silence. Peaceful, independent silence. By Friday, she had saved just over $1,200 in her new account. It wasn't much, but it was hers alone. Each dollar felt like a brick in the foundation of a new life. When she crawled into bed that night, Malik was already asleep, phone clutched in his hand. His face twitched occasionally, as if even his dreams were full of schemes. Imani turned off the lamp and whispered into the darkness, "Sleep while you can." Because the woman beside him was no longer the maid he bragged about. She was the storm he never saw coming. The morning light had a blunt honesty to it, as if the sun itself decided to stop flattering the house with warm promises. Imani woke before her alarm, mind already moving through the list of small, necessary betrayals she'd been making for weeks. Opened bank account. Done. Gather evidence. Ongoing. Redirect paychecks. Done. Lawyer retained. Done. Each checkbox felt less like paperwork and more like a thread she was pulling from a web, unraveling the trap that had held her. At the hospital that day, the rhythm of work was both blessing and curse. The steady click of keyboards and the polite monotone of patient calls offered distraction, an almost merciful anonymity. But every time she filed another claim or answered another question, she felt the weight of stolen hours. How many shifts had she given up to keep Malik afloat? How many moments of her life had been exchanged for his lies? During her lunch break, she opened the email from Patricia again. The wording was clinical, professional, and full of possibility. We have filed a notice of intent to separate finances. The court will review provisional measures within a few days. Do not confront him. Keep gathering documentation. If he asks questions, be neutral. If he acts suspiciously, call me. Imani read the lines 3 times. The date stamped on the court notice felt surreal. What had been an impossible dream 2 months ago had become a looming reality. Her hands trembled not from fear but from the enormity of what she had set into motion. That afternoon she ducked into the small staff bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back had lines at the corners of her eyes that weren't there last year. But she also had an expression Imani hadn't seen in a long time. One of steady purpose. The kind of look people wore before they did something difficult, necessary and irreversible. She returned to work, and in the quiet hours between calls, started compiling the timeline Patricia wanted. When Malik stopped working, when certain debts appeared, every suspicious transfer. She printed emails he'd sent to her in the name of business expenses that clearly weren't. She formatted the evidence into neat folders, digital and paper, each labeled with dates, amounts, and short notes on why it mattered. This was meticulous, grounded work. It turned betrayal into facts, grief into a path forward. That evening, when she walked into the house, Malik was on the couch, animated on a video call. He waved at her like a man showing off a new toy. "Hey, babe, look at this. Possible investor said he might front some of the marketing costs. Things are looking up." Imani smiled a measured smile and hung her coat. "That's great, Malik." He beamed, oblivious to the way the word felt hollow in her mouth. He returned to his call. She moved quietly to his office with the practiced ease of someone who no longer feared small acts of trespass. The room smelled of cologne and neglect. The pile of receipts sat like a festering wound on the desk. She pulled out the folder labeled Proof and added copies of the newly printed documents. Bank transfers showing money leaving their joint account. Receipts for restaurants and hotels she had never been to. A contract stamped with Malik's signature for a consulting gig that had never existed. She photographed everything, uploaded it to the cloud with encrypted names, and copied it to a USB drive she tucked into the seam of her purse. There was a certain cruel poetry to the act, turning his lies into the ink that would finish him off. At night she sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp flaring against the dark, and read through all the messages she'd saved. Some were casual, others brazen. One email in particular made her hands go cold. An invoice for a luxury retreat, with a CC charge to the joint card and a note from Malik, for tea. The handwriting made her feel like she'd been hit in the gut. Tasha. The name on every photo and every receipt became a nail hammered into the coffin of her illusions. She printed the most damning pages and wrapped them in an envelope marked confidential. Patricia had advised keeping physical backups in separate locations. She made copies, one in the locker at the hospital where she worked, one hidden in a false bottom of a drawer in Brenda's house, and one tucked into a safety deposit box she'd opened under a false pretense of long-term savings. The logistics were cold and clinical, but they were necessary. Control returned in the form of paperwork and careful placement. A week later, she received a call from Patricia. "We have a provisional hearing date for the financial separation," Patricia said. The lawyer's voice was quiet, impressed. "And Imani, don't be surprised if he starts asking questions. Stay calm. Do not confront him." Imani closed her eyes and let the silence of her kitchen wash over her. The house felt smaller, like the stage of a play she no longer wanted a part in. Her life had become a string of purposeful actions. She had traded frantic, exhausted compliance for deliberate, disciplined preparation. It was exhausting in a different way, but it felt right. She lay in bed that night watching the ceiling. Malik's breathing was the faint rustle beside her. She thought of the wedding photo still taped to the refrigerator, the smiling couple, the bright dress. There was grief for what had been lost and, more importantly, something like relief that the woman in that photo was now gone. Not dead. Replaced. Reborn. Her phone buzzed quietly. A message from Patricia. 11 a.m. Thursday. Be ready. Imani typed, I'll be there. And then, in a small, private note to herself, you're doing the right thing. She slept, for the first time in months, with a steadier heart. 2 nights later, Malik left his car keys on the kitchen counter as he often did, careless, habitual, leaving traces of his life like breadcrumbs. He tossed them and ambled out to meet a buddy, his tone indistinguishable from the morning's idle bravado. He never told her where he was really going. He didn't have to. By then, Imani had stopped asking. As soon as the front door clicked shut, Imani moved. A practiced, silent rhythm guided her as she crossed the living room, picked up his keys, and made for his car. The idea had first occurred to her in passing. If he was taking money out of their joint account, perhaps there were clues where he thought no one would look. She had cleaned that car dozens of times. Today, she would do more than clean. The trunk revealed the usual: takeout containers, used towels, an old gym bag. She pushed it aside and reached into the glove compartment. A small black rectangle lay there, not Malik's primary phone. It was an older model, an Android with a cracked screen tucked behind an insurance card like a bad secret. A thrill snapped through her. Instinct told her not to pry. Strategy told her to document everything. She slipped the device into her jacket and drove to a nearby parking lot. Her hands were steady despite the surge of adrenaline. The phone unlocked without a passcode, a gift. Messages filled the screen like confessions laid bare. Names, dates, plans. The most recent thread was with Tasha Long. Her breath hitched. Miss you already, baby, Tasha had written. Counting down until Friday, Malik replied. Do you have the money for this weekend? Tasha, we're going somewhere special. Malik, I got you. Don't worry. Imani'll cover the bills, I'll cover the fun. Her hands went numb. He'd joked about a free maid to his friends, the same man now admitting he relied on her to fund his escapades. Imani photographed each screen, saved each contact. She found photos. Malik and Tasha at a Skyline restaurant, Tasha holding a delicate bracelet, Malik's arm around her waist in a photo that had once been reserved for family albums. The images burned like acid on her skin, but she kept going. Methodical, clinical. Evidence was evidence. She scrolled further and discovered flight confirmations, hotel bookings, gift receipts, all paid for by charges to their joint account or transfers that had gone through Malik's business account after receiving deposits from hers. The picture painted itself. He siphoned her paychecks, moved them through accounts, and bought Tasha a life of casual luxury funded by the woman he'd called his maid. When she returned home that night, phone tucked into her purse like contraband, Malik was already there, collapsing onto the couch with a takeout box and a grin. Baby, you won't believe the chip he gave me at the gym. Guy said he knows a guy. We might be set. He chewed loudly, oblivious. Imani nodded and poured him a glass of water. She wore neutrality like armor. He had no idea his life lived inside her pockets now, digitally documented. Ready? That evening, while Malik fell asleep to the dull drone of a late-night show, Imani sat at her kitchen table with a trembling coffee. She uploaded the screenshots from the secret phone to Patricia's secure portal, adding meticulous notes, dates, times, locations. She labeled the files with clinical precision. Patricia messaged back almost instantly. Excellent. This is comprehensive. Don't confront. We'll use this. Imani exhaled so deeply her ribs ached. The secret phone had been a revelation, not just because it confirmed betrayal, but because it crystallized the justice she was building. The cold, small acts of collection and backup had become her armor. The truth was now inked into files and folders, both digital and paper, impossible to ignore, impossible to gaslight away. She slid the little black phone into a locked drawer and lay awake for hours thinking of all the ways her life had been spent building someone else's fantasy. But beneath the grief there was a quiet pride. She'd found the proof. She'd traced the money. She had the receipts, the messages, the timeline. It was only a matter of time now. And when the day came for the court to look at the evidence, she would be there, calm, composed, and ready. The rain came down in thin needles that morning, coating everything in a glassy film. Imani sat in her car outside the hospital, letting the wipers drag a slow rhythm across the windshield. The hearing for financial separation was only days away. She wasn't nervous. What she felt was something colder, steadier, the quiet before a storm she herself had summoned. Inside, the workday unfolded in its usual blur of ringing phones and clipped conversations. She moved through it like a ghost, polite and efficient, invisible. Nobody looking at her would guess that the woman filing billing codes and answering questions about insurance had a second life tucked into encrypted folders and sealed envelopes. At lunch, she met Brenda in the cafeteria. Brenda had that mother hen look again, half pride, half worry. "You sure you're all right, baby?" Imani stirred her soup. "I'm all right. Just tired of pretending. Pretend a little longer," Brenda said gently. "It's the last mile that breaks most people." Imani smiled. "I won't break." When the shift ended, she drove, not home, but to a small therapy office that Patricia had recommended. The sign outside read, Dr. Helen Carter, Trauma and Financial Abuse Specialist. The waiting room smelled faintly of lavender and paper. When Dr. Helen appeared, mid-50s, gray curls, kind eyes, Imani felt an unfamiliar relief. Here she could speak without calculating. She told the whole story again. The 4 jobs, the exhaustion, the laughter behind the door, the discovery of Tasha, the hidden phone. Each word scraped something loose inside her. Dr. Helen listened without flinching. "What you've described," she said finally, "is a pattern of financial control. He made you responsible for his survival so that you'd forget your own." Imani nodded slowly. "That's exactly what it felt like. And you're already undoing it. You're reclaiming control. But I want you to write down every day one thing that belongs only to you. A thought, a choice, an action he can't touch." Imani left the office lighter. The assignment sounded small, almost childlike, but she understood its power. Control wasn't a thunderclap. It was the steady accumulation of moments that said mine. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with her notebook and wrote, "Today I chose not to explain myself." She looked at the sentence until it no longer looked small. It looked like freedom in one line. Malik wandered in halfway through the evening, humming, pretending life was normal. "We should order pizza," he said. "I'll grab cash from the joint account." "I already moved my money," she replied evenly. "Use yours." He blinked. "What?" "You said you were handling things." "Handle them." He hesitated, searching her face for softness. There was none. He laughed it off and ordered anyway, muttering about moods. She let him. Every time he reached for the old dynamic and the jokes, the lazy charm, she gave him nothing to hold on to. Indifference, she learned, was louder than anger. After he fell asleep on the couch, she opened her laptop and reviewed Patricia's newest message. "Court accepts filing. Within a month we can petition for divorce. Keep accounts separate. Save what you can. Do not reveal the phone." Imani closed the computer and stared into the darkness of the living room. Malik snored softly, oblivious. The pizza box sat half open on the table, greasy fingerprints marking the cardboard. That, she thought, was his legacy, spilled crumbs and borrowed comfort. She rose quietly, washed her own cup, and left his mess untouched. Tomorrow she'd go to work, meet Brenda, attend therapy, deposit another paycheck into the account with only her name on it. A routine of reclamation. The silence of the house no longer frightened her. It sounded like preparation. The confrontation didn't happen with screaming. It began with Malik's confusion. He stood at the kitchen counter one gray Wednesday afternoon, bank papers spread before him, his face drained of color. "Imani," he said slowly, "did you close our account?" She set her coffee mug down. "I moved my deposits." "That's all?" "You can't just—" He waved the papers. "We got bills!" "You have bills," she corrected. His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done paying for your mistakes." The words landed between them like dropped glass. Malik's mouth opened, closed. "You being dramatic again?" "I told you things are about to turn around." She met his gaze calmly. "You said that 3 years ago. Since then, I've worked 4 jobs while you entertained yourself. You lied about debts. You lied about money. You lied about Tasha. The name hit him like a slap. Color flooded back into his face, angry red. Who told you that? No one had to. You documented everything for me. He stared, bewildered. What are you talking about? The phone in your car, she said quietly. The one without a password. For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking above the stove. Then he laughed in a desperate, brittle sound. So what, you snooping on me now? You gone crazy. Imani stood. I went looking for truth. Found it. He took a step toward her. Look, baby, you misunderstand. It's not like that. Tasha, she's just someone I talk to. You know I love you. She held his gaze. You love what I do for you. I made mistakes, he said quickly. I can fix it. We can start over. She reached into her purse and placed an envelope on the table. The thick paper whispered as it slid across the surface. That's not possible. Those are divorce papers. You've been served. For a second, he didn't move. Then he sank into a chair as if his legs had failed him. You serious? Completely. He rubbed his face. After everything I've been through, you gonna leave me broke? You can't do this. I already did. She walked to the hallway, her suitcase waiting just beyond the door. Malik stood, voice rising. You think you can walk out like this? I built this house. You lived in it, she said. I paid for it. He reached out, caught her arm. The grip wasn't violent, but it was possession, and that was enough. Imani turned slowly, eyes sharp. Don't touch me. Something in her tone, steady, low, made him let go. Please, he whispered. Don't do this. You called me your maid, Malik. Her voice didn't shake. You made sure I never rested. You took everything I earned and spent it on someone else. You ended this, not me. He stared at her blank. She picked up the suitcase and walked to the door. The air outside smelled of impending rain. Where are you going to go? He asked. Somewhere peaceful. You'll regret this. She paused on the threshold and looked back one last time. No, she said. You will. Then she was gone. Outside, the wind carried the first drops of rain. Imani loaded her suitcase into the trunk, started the car, and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed a woman pale from exhaustion, but lit from within by something fierce and unyielding. Her phone buzzed. Patricia's name flashed. You did it? Yes, good, don't go back. Not even once. Imani nodded even though the lawyer couldn't see her. I won't. She drove away from the house slowly, watching the porch light recede in the mirror until it disappeared. Each block put distance between her and the years she'd lost. By the time she reached Brenda's street, the rain had turned into a steady downpour that blurred the city lights into ribbons of gold. Brenda was waiting at the door, holding a towel and a cup of tea. You're safe now, she said. Imani stepped inside, dripping water, heart still hammering. Safe. The word felt strange in her mouth, fragile and heavy all at once. She sank onto the couch, letting the warmth of the room seep into her bones. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the clock ticked softly. The storm had finally broken, but for once she was the one who had called it down. The next morning dawned quiet and pale. The storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean, the sky a fragile silver. Imani woke on Brenda's couch wrapped in a borrowed blanket, the faint smell of lavender detergent around her. For a moment she didn't move. The silence pressed close, not heavy like before, but new, tentative, almost shy. She realized that for the first time in years, she didn't have to rush anywhere. Didn't have to explain herself. Didn't have to check whether Malik had drained the account again. Brenda padded in from the kitchen holding 2 mugs. Coffee strong enough to raise the dead. Imani smiled, voice rough with sleep. Perfect. They sat in the hush of early morning while the city outside blinked awake. Brenda studied her over the rim of her cup. How you feeling? Imani thought about it. Tired, relieved, scared, free. All at once? All at once, Brenda nodded. That's what rebirth feels like, honey. Messy and miraculous. Later that day, Patricia called. He's been served. I've filed the motion for exclusive possession of the house and temporary support suspension. You won't owe a thing. Take a breath, Imani. You've earned it. The words washed over her like warm water. She thanked the lawyer and hung up, staring at the phone as if it might dissolve. You've earned it. Nobody had said that to her in years. By evening, she was unpacking her suitcase in Brenda's spare room, folding clothes she'd barely had time to wash before leaving. Each garment seemed to belong to another life. The scrubs that smelled faintly of antiseptic, the restaurant uniform with a faded name tag, the black slacks from the call center. Proof of all the lives she'd lived simultaneously, just to keep one man comfortable. She took out her notebook from therapy and opened to a new page. At the top she wrote, Day 1, my life belongs to me. Beneath it she listed small things. Drink coffee slowly, call mom, take a walk without counting minutes, breathe. It wasn't a grand plan, but it was direction. That night she stepped outside onto Brenda's porch. The air was cool, the street glistening. Somewhere a dog barked, somewhere a train hummed in the distance. The world hadn't changed, but she had. The ache in her chest was still there, but now it pulsed with possibility instead of panic. A week later, she rented a small apartment across town. 1 bedroom, thin walls, cheap linoleum, but hers. She signed the lease with a shaking hand, the pen scratching like thunder in miniature. The manager handed her the keys. Welcome home. Home. The word made her eyes sting. Brenda helped her move. They carried boxes up the narrow stairs, laughing at the wobbling furniture and peeling paint. When the last box was in, Brenda opened a bottle of sparkling cider. To freedom, she said, clinking their glasses. May you never scrub another man's mess again. That night, Imani lay on a mattress on the floor and stared at the ceiling. Moonlight spilled through the blinds, pooling over the unpacked boxes. The apartment smelled of new beginnings. Dust, cardboard, hope. She whispered into the stillness, You did it. The words sounded unbelievable yet true. In the weeks that followed, life reshaped itself slowly. She adjusted her hours at the hospital to part-time, quit the restaurant, let the call center job go. Money was tight, but she could breathe. She began meeting Dr. Helen twice a month. In therapy, she learned how to measure progress not in leaps but inches, how each calm morning was a victory, how choosing rest over guilt was radical. Patricia called regularly with updates. Malik hadn't contested the filings yet, but creditors were circling. He's panicking, Patricia said one afternoon. You might get calls from collectors. Don't engage. Everything goes through me. Understood, Imani replied. Her voice no longer trembled. One evening, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against her better judgment, she answered, Imani, it's Tasha. The voice was tentative, strained. I'm sorry to call, but he's been contacting me nonstop. He told me you were separated, that you were crazy. I found out yesterday he lied. I just wanted you to know I cut him off. Imani was silent for a moment. That's between you and him now, she said finally. But thank you for telling me. Tasha hesitated. He's desperate. Be careful. I'm done being careful for him. Imani hung up gently and blocked the number. When she set the phone down, she realized her hands were steady. The trembling that had once been constant was gone. Freedom, she learned, was a muscle. The more she used it, the stronger it became. 6 months passed like pages in a book she was finally writing herself. The divorce proceedings dragged on, but Patricia handled them with cool precision. Malik tried every tactic, guilt, charm, anger, filtered now through lawyer letters and ignored texts. He even showed up once at Brenda's house shouting from the curb until the neighbors threatened to call the police. Brenda stood beside Imani, arms crossed. You see? That's a man drowning in his own mess. Don't throw him a rope. After that, he disappeared into silence. Imani's world grew quieter, simpler. She worked her hospital hours, took evening classes toward a physical therapy certification she'd abandoned years ago, and spent Sundays with her mother. Her mother's eyes glistened the first time she visited the apartment. It's small, she said, touching the curtain, but it feels peaceful. It is, Imani said. It finally is. Dr. Helen helped her dismantle the guilt that lingered like smoke. They talked about boundaries, about trust, about how survival sometimes disguises itself as devotion. One afternoon, Helen said, You keep waiting to feel finished. Healing doesn't finish. It deepens. Imani wrote that in her notebook, underlined twice. Brenda threw her a small celebration the day the judge finalized the divorce. Patricia sent a single line by email. Judgment granted in full. Debts remain his. Brenda printed the message, framed it, and hung it in her kitchen. A masterpiece of modern literature, she joked. Imani laughed until she cried. Relief came in strange form. Laughter that turned into tears, silence that no longer felt like loneliness. She slept through the night without dreams for the first time in years. At work, her supervisor offered her a new position, administrative coordinator with regular hours and benefits. "You've earned this," he said. The word struck her again, that phrase she was still learning to believe. By summer she had a rhythm, workdays that ended before sunset, classes that stirred her old curiosity, long walks through the park where she breathed without thinking of time clocks. She met new people, built small friendships not rooted in pity. Sometimes she saw couples holding hands and felt a pang. But it wasn't for Malik. It was for the years she'd lost believing love meant sacrifice without return. Then, one evening in early autumn, Brenda invited her to a cookout. "My nephew's friend Isaiah's coming. Don't roll your eyes. He's decent, not another project." Isaiah turned out to be quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who asked questions and actually listened to answers. They talked about work, about books, about traveling somewhere far when time allowed. When he walked her to her car, he didn't ask for her number immediately. He asked, "Would you like to talk again sometime?" "Yes," she said, surprising herself. "I would." Weeks passed, slow and cautious. Dinners turned into long walks, phone calls into laughter that didn't drain her. He never asked about Malik, and she never volunteered the story. She didn't need to. He treated her like someone whose time mattered. That was enough. In therapy, she mentioned him. Dr. Helen smiled. "You're learning the difference between safety and rescue." By winter, Imani's apartment had transformed. Plants on the windowsill, photos of friends, shelves lined with textbooks and thrift store novels. It looked lived in, claimed. On a Sunday morning, she brewed coffee and watched the sunrise, realizing she hadn't thought about Malik in weeks. Not with anger, not with longing, when with nothing at all. That emptiness was the cleanest peace she'd ever felt. One evening she visited Brenda, who poured 2 glasses of wine and asked, "So what now, Ms. Reed?" Imani smiled. "Now I live," Brenda raised her glass. To living. Outside, the city glowed unremarkable and beautiful. Inside, laughter filled the small house where once upon a time she had arrived trembling with fear. The woman on Brenda's couch that night had been shattered. The woman raising her glass now was whole. 2 full years passed before their paths crossed again. It happened on a late summer Saturday, the kind of day that shimmered with heat even after the sun began to fall. Imani had spent the morning at the rehabilitation center, where she now worked as a licensed physical therapy assistant, helping an elderly patient take his first steps after surgery. The man's trembling smile as he stood without the walker stayed with her all afternoon. She carried that small victory like a quiet medal. After work, she stopped at the downtown market, list in hand. Lemons, jasmine rice, candles. She was halfway down the aisle when a voice behind her said her name. "Imani?" The sound turned her blood cold for one impossible heartbeat. She turned. Malik Ward stood by the end-cap display of coffee beans, older by more than the 2 years that had passed. His shoulders sagged under a faded shirt. The gleam of swagger that once clung to him was gone. His eyes darted before settling on hers, uncertain, almost pleading. "Hey," he said, giving a weak laugh. "Didn't think you'd even recognize me." "I almost didn't," she replied. For a moment they simply looked at each other, 2 ghosts meeting in daylight. He broke the silence first. "You look different." "I am." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. You got a new job or something? Heard from somebody you went back to school?" "I did. Finished my certification. Working full-time now." "That's good." He hesitated. "Real good. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Imani placed her basket on the floor, hands resting on the handle. "For what part?" He swallowed. "All of it. The lies, the way I treated you. I thought I could hustle my way through life, and I used you to do it. You didn't deserve that." The apology should have landed like thunder, but instead it was quiet, dull. She realized she had imagined this moment once long ago, imagined it bringing catharsis. It didn't. The forgiveness he sought had already happened without him, somewhere between therapy sessions and quiet mornings with coffee. "I accept your apology," she said softly, "but it changes nothing. Do you forgive me?" "I don't think about you enough to decide." Her tone was calm, not cruel. "That's the truest peace I've found." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Guess I earned that." He shifted the grocery bag in his hand. "I got a job now. Office work. Trying to pay off the debts. 10 years maybe, and I'll be clear. I hope you make it, she said. And she meant it, not out of love, but because pity was the only emotion left. He opened his mouth as if to say more, then closed it again. Take care, Imani. You too, Malik. She turned, left him standing among the coffee beans, and walked toward the checkout. Her hands were steady on the cart handle, her heartbeat normal. Outside sunlight spilled over the pavement. She paused for a second, letting it touch her face. It was over. Completely, finally, undeniably over. That evening, Isaiah came by carrying groceries and laughter. You didn't start dinner without me, did you? I wouldn't dare, she said, smiling. They cooked together in the small kitchen, onions sizzling, music low. When she told him about the encounter, he simply took her hand. You okay? Better than okay. She squeezed his fingers. Seeing him was like seeing a story I've already finished reading. They ate on the balcony as the city lights blinked on, the air heavy with jasmine. Isaiah raised his glass. To endings that make room for beginnings. She touched her glass to his. To peace. A year later, the new house smelled faintly of paint and cinnamon. Morning light pooled across the hardwood floor, catching on framed photos. Brenda laughing at the hospital picnic. Imani's mother holding a plate of Sunday dinner. Isaiah grinning with a smudge of flour on his cheek. Every picture told a story that began after the storm. The house itself wasn't large, but it was bright, full of windows and silence that sounded like safety. She'd bought it on her own credit, her own savings. When the papers were signed, she'd walked through each empty room whispering thanks to every version of herself that had survived long enough to stand there. Now, on weekends, she planted herbs along the fence while Isaiah painted the porch railing. They argued playfully about colors, about whether the cat should be allowed on the counter. It was ordinary, and that ordinariness was miraculous. At work, she'd been promoted to senior therapist. Her supervisor told her, patients open up to you. You make them believe they can heal. She smiled, thinking, because I know what it takes. Some nights she stayed late, helping a stroke patient practice lifting a cup, coaxing slow triumph from frustration. When they managed, she'd say, see, strength isn't what you start with. It's what you build after everything falls apart. The words were for them, but also for her. Spring turned to summer. On a Saturday afternoon, she hosted a small backyard gathering. Brenda, her mother, a few colleagues, Isaiah beside her. The grill smoked, music floated, laughter threaded through the warm air. When Brenda tapped her glass, everyone quieted. To Imani, Brenda said, smiling wide, who taught us all that rising from ashes isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your light. Everyone raised a glass. Imani felt the sting of tears, the good kind. She looked around, these faces, this peace, and felt the circle close. The girl who once tiptoed through a dark house of secrets had built one filled with sunlight. As dusk settled, she and Isaiah sat on the porch swing, fireflies beginning their slow dance in the yard. Do you ever think about him? He asked gently. Sometimes, she admitted, but not with anger. More like remembering a place I used to live, small, dark, and too quiet. I visited in memory just long enough to be grateful I moved. He nodded. You really did rise from it. She smiled, glancing at the small silver bracelet on her wrist, a phoenix charm rising through tiny flames. No, she said softly. I burned it down and built something better. They sat in silence then, the kind that felt earned. The night deepened, full of crickets and faraway laughter. Imani leaned back, watching the sky fade into stars. Freedom, she thought, wasn't loud. It was steady, patient, alive in the bones. It was coffee sipped slowly, bills with only her name on them, laughter without apology. It was a home where every corner was hers, and as the first firefly drifted close, hovering in the warm dark, she smiled. A quiet, luminous thing. Because she had done what she once thought impossible. She had walked through fire, and she hadn't just survived, she had become the fire.